So today we're going to dive into a fascinating and maybe a little unsettling idea. The idea that the solid, separate you that you feel at the very center of your world, well, it might be less of a real thing and more of a transaction, an echo instead of a voice. You know that feeling, right? That sense that there's a me sitting behind your eyes, acting like a pilot in a command center. And you're trying to steer this incredibly complex machine of thoughts and feelings and impulses, but a lot of the time, the ship just seems to have a mind of its own.
And this feeling, it sets up this fundamental divide in how we see everything. On one side, there's you, the thinker, the feeler, the one who's supposed to be in charge. And then on the other side, there's everything else, the outside world, other people, even your own body doing things you didn't ask it to do. It basically frames our entire lives as a kind of battle.
So, what is this ghost? This feeling of a separate self that's always trying to wrestle with reality? You know, we're often taught that the whole point of growing up is to get this ghost firmly in control of the machine.
Just think about it for a second. Ever since we were kids, we're told things like control your anger or just focus your thoughts. And the method we're taught is almost always about force. It's about suppression. It's kind of like taking a big flat wooden board out to the ocean and trying to literally smash the waves flat. All you're going to do is make a lot more noise, a lot more chaos, and you're just going to get exhausted.
To really get why that approach it never works, we've got to look at the model we're using in the first place. We have to take a closer look at the actual boundaries we've drawn around this thing we call me. Now, in Western psychology, we have a name for this boundary, of course, the ego. We think of it as this psychological fortress that's designed to separate me from everything that is not me. It's our identity, right? It's our command center, the hero of our own little movie. But here's the question. What if that fortress is built on totally imaginary lines? Because look at what this model does. It creates a permanent state of war. The self becomes this tiny, known, controlled island of order sitting in the middle of a huge, unknown, chaotic ocean called the other. And when you see things this way, your entire life becomes this endless project of defending your little island from that scary ocean. Okay, let's make this really concrete. Let's see how this whole dynamic plays out in a super simple, everyday situation. We're just going to observe, no judgment. So, the setup couldn't be simpler. We have a person, Alex, in a quiet room, just sitting on a chair. That's it. The physical action is stillness. And the internal goal is just as simple. Maybe Alex is trying to meditate or maybe just concentrate on some work. But the command from the pilot is clear. Focus. Just pay attention to this one thing. And then, something happens. Out of absolutely nowhere, a thought just appears. It could be about what to have for dinner, or some email Alex forgot to send, or a random memory from 10 years ago. It wasn't invited, it just showed up. The machine, it seems, is not following orders. And watch what happens next. Instantly, there's a physical reaction. Maybe the jaw clenches just a little, or the shoulders tighten up. Alex is now annoyed at Alex. The pilot is fighting the ship. That internal conflict we've been talking about, it's happening right here in this tiny moment. The battle is on. But what if the battle itself is based on a complete misunderstanding? That misunderstanding lies in the hard line we're so used to drawing between ourself and the world. So now we're going to start to gently pull that line apart. And we're going to see that the connection we're looking for, well, it's been there the whole time. We just weren't seeing it. And this is a really crucial point. We draw lines with our words. We say wave and ocean like they're two different things. But could you actually go out and find the exact point where the wave stops and the ocean begins? Of course not. The distinction is just a useful label in our minds. It's not a physical fact. What if the same thing is true for me and the world? This one really illustrates the paradox beautifully. The mind, this self, is constantly trying to stand apart and control itself. But the tool you're using to observe can't also be the thing you're observing at the very same time. An eye can see everything else in the room, but it can't see itself. And the moment you try to grab hold of the eye who is thinking, it disappears because it's the one doing the grabbing. This is such a great metaphor. I mean, think about it. The lines of longitude and latitude on a globe are absolutely essential for getting from point A to point B. They're incredibly useful. But nobody on a hike in Ecuador actually expects to trip over the equator. It's a useful convention, not a real thing on the ground. Well, in the same way, the idea of a separate self is a very useful social convention, but it's not an actual feature of reality.
All right, this is where it all comes together. Everything we've discussed so far has been building to this final section because it contains the one crucial point that reframes the entire picture. We're about to look at the hidden relationship that just dissolves the conflict.
Remember Alex sitting in that quiet room? All that tension, that frustration, that feeling of fighting with yourself? We automatically assumed that that was the problem we needed to solve, but it wasn't. It was only a symptom. The real issue, the root cause of the whole struggle, was the underlying belief that there were two separate things to begin with, that there was an Alex on one side and a thought on the other. The conflict was created the second Alex picked a side and drew a battle line right down the middle of what was actually a single, unified process. And this leads us to the core insight. It's a principle you could call mutual arising. It's simply the idea that things we think of as opposites are, in fact, two sides of the very same coin. They'd literally create each other. You can't have one without the other. When you look at the examples, it becomes almost obvious. You simply can't have an event called buying without an event called selling. They're the same single transaction, just seen from two different points of view. You can't have an organism like a fish without the environment, the water, that defines what a fish even is. And in exactly the same way, you cannot have a self without a world for it to experience. They arise together, always. And this is the ultimate reframe. We usually think of our consciousness as a kind of spotlight that we, from our little command center, shine out at the world. But what if that's completely backward? What if consciousness is more like a response? What if it's just something the universe is doing? A process that arises out of the relationship between a nervous system and an environment. In that view, suddenly you're not a ghost in a machine anymore. You are the whole unified field through which the universe is experiencing itself. Follow Human Behavior Decoded if you prefer concepts that challenge conventional assumptions. So we'll leave you with this last question to think about. Our language basically forces us to see I as a thing, as a noun. But what happens to that whole internal conflict, the pilot fighting the ship, if you start seeing yourself not as a thing that has experiences, but as the very process of experiencing itself? What changes when you realize you're not in the universe, but that you are the universe? Well, universing.